In the aftermath of the brutal murder of George Floyd at the hands of law enforcement, we are launching a new interview-based collection of stories where members can share their personal experiences in coping with such tragedies and injustices. I'm Gayle Sheridan. I've been a social justice advocate for over 40 years, and I teach in the radio and television production program at Suffolk County Community College. And I am here with my friend, Kaliah.
Hi, Gayle. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?
Good, thank you. My name is Kaliah Greene. I currently work in the Office of Planning and Institutional Effectiveness at the college. I have been a community advocate and an educational advocate for about 15 years. So I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity.
And I'm so grateful, thank you for joining me, because it's really important that we are able to have these conversations. So thank you. I'm so grateful. When you heard and saw what happened to George Floyd, what went through your mind?
I'll be honest, it was tough. In dealing with COVID and everything else that happened this year, I think for me, normally I have a immediate reaction, but this was actually a delayed reaction because I really, even though we've been here before, I really couldn't believe the severity of what was happening. And so there's always been an adverse, at times, relationship between communities of color and law enforcement that I thought had been improving over the years. And this one here, it went beyond words. And I'll be honest, I really didn't have the words at the very beginning. It took me a few days to actually process what we as a nation were seeing, and we actually as a world were seeing. And you know, I have two sons, so it was just very hard to kind of put into words and my feelings. I think I went through the 5 steps of mourning in probably 2 days.
Wow. So you say you have two sons. How do you process that?
I'll be honest, it was extremely hard because I have two young sons, and my father is in his mid-70s, and this is something that he's been discussing with my brothers and I since we were kids. Now, my conversation about, you know, police and what to do was not as involved as my brothers, but I still had the conversation based on, you know, African-American parents. Because of that history, you have to talk to your parents about. So with my sons being so young, I actually was heartbroken for them. Because I never expected, and I don't think my dad ever expected, to live in a world to where things appear that they're getting worse and not better. So for me, a piece of the process of it being hard was having to look at them and think, man, what is their world going to look like? And is there actually anything I can do to help fix it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so preparing them, but as you say, your sons are very young, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, like, what do they call it? Age appropriate, right? You have to be careful.
You do. And the way I had to kind of frame it to my 4-year-old, because one day I was just crying. I woke up and I was watching the TV. And I was literally crying because it was just kind of like, are you kidding me? Like it came to that point where it's like, I can't. And he said, why are you crying? I said, you know, something happened, something very bad happened to a man, and mommy's just a little bit upset. And I want to make it age appropriate, but unfortunately there has to be some reality in a household of what is happening, because at some point he's going to have to deal with that.
Absolutely. And so you started to touch on this. How do you cope with these feelings?
It's very tough in this season. I'm going to be honest. Dealing with I think dealing with every day being a Black woman is something different, something that I can't get rid of my skin tone. I think COVID added a layer because we've all, had to adjust to being home, some of the protocols being put in place. And it felt like just as the pause was becoming normal and everything else, then you have this happen. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, coping, I had to give myself time. Okay. I had to allow myself to feel, because sometimes with the hustle and bustle of everything, you don't have time to feel. It's just kind of like, hey, this happened, I'm enraged. And then, we move on to the next step because we have to. But I think this time around, because of the viciousness of what we all saw, and because we really couldn't go out normally, that I couldn't go to work. My work was at home. I had to deal with it. I had to talk through it. I called my dad a lot because, one, I wanted to check on him to see how he was doing as someone who lived through civil rights and has, lived most of his life going through these issues. I had to talk to my mom. Because again, she's in her 70s and she's dealt with this. I called all three of my brothers. So for me, the coping was a lot of talking. Once I was ready, I had to get it out. Otherwise, it would have stressed me out keeping it in.
Sure. So having a support system, reaching out to your support system, right?
Yes, exactly.
Why do you think this particular, and maybe you answered this already, why do you think what happened to George Floyd, why do you think we've gotten this kind of reaction, protests, change, right? Things are changing. Mm-hmm. Why do you think the murder of George Floyd is getting this kind of attention?
I think, and it'll go back to the word viciousness of it.
Yeah.
We all know that not all police officers are bad.
Right.
We know that all of anything is bad. No, that doesn't exist. You have bad apples in groups. But I think that in addition to the viciousness of it all, and also it appearing so nonchalant, where, this man, you can see he's bleeding out. He is telling you verbally, hey, I can't breathe. You see other officers standing around and there's nothing being done. And as an officer, in addition to protecting and serving, you're also a first responder. And that's a piece of your job.
Of the responsibility.
Is to respond. And to see, the officer with his hands in his pocket, and to know that this grown man, not a kid, this grown man called out for his mom. I think all of those elements, and we watched it, all of those elements together, I think there was a final, and thankfully now collective, for the most part, enough. Like, we get it. We get the adversarial relationship. Some people, I think, didn't believe the history of it. Mm-hmm. If you don't take the time to study history, anybody can tell you anything. I think being a mother and sort of kind of seeing my sons in that predicament where we are taught to comply, and even with compliance, this possibly happening, I think there was a collective outrage of, okay, we've dealt with this for a long time, and not just, African Americans or people within the diaspora, but I also think allies and those who might have questioned it before. It was just kind of like, at this point, it's gotten out of hand, and something has got to be done to change this moving forward. Yeah,
that outrage, right? It was I mean, a lot of us have said it was so unbelievable, so egregious, so horrifying.
Yeah. And
That,
and that's the word. Horrifying to watch. Horrifying to just see. I really don't, not saying I don't care, you know, people bring up past and whatnot. He's a human being.
exactly.
And I would expect any human being,
Right.
especially with it being a part of your job responsibility, that would be taken into consideration. And with it being so inhumane,
Yeah, right.
that's
Right.
the part.
Yeah.
That's the part that got me. It was just kind of like, now wait a second.
Right.
Let's put this, let's pause this for a second. And it's time to really, it's time to really focus on changing elements
Yeah.
of the system.
Yeah. And the video is the thing that if we didn't have the video, who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
As awful and as we said, horrifying as that video was, there was proof. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot deny what happened there.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
You said earlier that you have been working in education for some time. What specific things do you think we can do as educators
I think
to make change? Sorry.
I think the first thing, that's okay, as educators, sometimes we have to go back and educate ourselves.
Okay.
So one of the first things I think we as educators have to do, and this is our responsibility. Mm-hmm. Now, we cannot hold others responsible for doing their jobs without doing ours. And a piece of that is going back and looking through history. And right now we live in a society where information, now you do have to check whether the information is right or wrong and your source, but the information is at our fingertips. So I think going back and educating ourselves on the history of not just policing, but educating ourselves on the criminal justice system as a whole, educating mm-hmm. ourselves on Black history, which is American history, right. So that we can properly inform our students, our coworkers, of why, to some degree, we haven't, and I want to be clear, we haven't just arrived here. Yeah. We've been here. It's just that we haven't been dealing with the here. So I think as educators, we have to educate ourselves first in order for us to be effective in educating others. There's no way you can, I don't even want to say, because I don't even like arguments, but have dialogue or true dialogue or honest and transparent dialogue. Yeah. When you're just as much in the dark yourself. Mm-hmm. And then I think in addition to educating, we have to act. And acting looks very different to everyone. Mm-hmm. I think I saw a meme where it was, okay, if you aren't comfortable with speaking out, then if you're an artist, do something related to art. Yeah. If you are good with this lane, do something that is related to that. Acting looks different for everyone. However, we just can't sit and say, this is wrong. No. How are we going to help fix it? And so I think that's the next step.
Yeah, and I love the diversity of what you just said, because I've had several conversations, and I myself being an artist, right? I part of how I cope, right, is to create content of some kind. And so what does that mean? So I love that, you know, a lot of times people say, oh, well, you shouldn't do this and you should do that. But it's a really clear way to put that everybody's abilities are different, and why not go with whatever your strength is.
Right. And it doesn't say that it takes away the collective. You can, and I always say nowadays we have an either or conversation, but I don't understand why we can't have an and conversation.
Yeah, right.
You can be in your lane and support me in mine, and support the collective. So I think people really need to start having the A and D conversation, instead of, well, this is my lane, I don't need you in my lane, I'm going to do this over in my lane. No, there's more power in unity and togetherness than there is going to be in individualism.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent point. So what is your if you could come up with wonder, what would your goal be, or what is your hope for the future on the whole?
What is my
What
hope?
would be the ultimate?
The ultimate, and I don't know if this is actually possible, but you said what would be ideal is that my children, my family members, my friends would be respected and honored for who they are and not be judged unfairly based on prejudices and bias and stereotypes or anything else because of their skin tone. That when people see my sons, whether they're 4, 14, 24, 34, they're seen as young men, older men, whatever, without seeing them as threats. My hope would be when my sons walk in for a job interview or send in a resume or anything else, they would be judged on their skills and their abilities and not what their names might sound like and who they might be before they walk in.
Right.
It is my ultimate hope that when my sons have interactions with law enforcement, and to be completely honest, there are law enforcement members in my family. So again, it's not an either or conversation, it is an and. It is my hope that what we tell our sons in terms of the conversations that we still have to have, by the time they're of age, I won't have to have it with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I won't have to sit my son down at, nowadays, the conversation really does have to happen, not in your teenage years, but when my son is 8.
Wow.
And have to say, hey, this is how you have to act with interactions or this and this and that. And then when he questions, well, mom, why isn't that the same way for my friend? I hope we get to a place where I don't have to explain that. Do I pray we get there? Absolutely. Because being a mom of color, specifically a Black mom, is hard. It is extremely hard. I don't care how well-to-do you are, it is hard.
Sure.
So that weight, lifting that weight would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be amazing to get to a space where that conversation is not necessary amongst a whole bunch of other necessary conversations, but there wouldn't be a need to have that particular conversation.
Right. If they are seen for who they are, 2 well-mannered young men who were raised by a mom and a dad who want the same thing that most other parents want for their children, that's what I want you to see.
Exactly. That was awesome. So what haven't I asked you that you think would be important to include in this conversation?
Gayle, that's a tough question.
Well, you mentioned that you have law enforcement members in your family, but I don't know that you want to talk about that or not. That's up to you.
I'll speak on it a little bit. So I do have members of law enforcement in my family. So I think when we talk about the A and D conversation, it's the same way with the educational system. We know that you can support and love education, which my family does, because we're also a family where my immediate family, we're all educators. Okay. From my mom and my dad, all of my brothers were all in education, whether it's K through 12 or college. Okay.
Awesome.
So you can love education and understand the importance of education while underscoring that there are aspects of the educational system as it is, K through 12, higher ed, that need to be changed, adjusted, revised to stay with the times and also the needs of your students. I think it's the same way when it comes to policing and police enforcement in communities of color. I think you can, and in fact, we do support law enforcement. However, based on the history of law enforcement and some of the policies that have been adverse to Black and brown communities, there are aspects of the system that have to be changed. Do we need police officers? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. When I call 911, I want that authority to show up and to assist me. However, what I don't want that authority to do, in the same way I don't want it in the classroom, is to base your interaction with me on your stereotype of me, your bias of me, your prejudice of me, or your racist feelings of me. Mm-hmm. So again, for me, it's always about the end. And our sons, we support law enforcement, but we are a Black family first.
Sure.
Those relatives are blue when they're on duty. I am Black 24/7, 365. That is not going to change.
Yeah, since you brought it up, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. A lot of times we hear that as a response. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yes. I want people to know that throughout history, and the reason, from my understanding, but I'll just also speak from personal experience. When you hear Black Lives Matter, it does not mean that all other lives don't matter. We know everybody's life matters. However, from a historical standpoint, African American men and women were always considered 3/5 of a man, or not human at all. So when we look at the Constitution, when we look at the frameworks on which these United States stand, they were not meant for people of color. They were meant for white, Anglo, Saxon, Protestant men. So when I say Black Lives Matter, I'm trying to underscore that my race should not indict me overall. Mm-hmm. Prior to getting my fair due process. It does not mean that a white life, an Asian life, a Latino life, a Hispanic life, or any other race or ethnicity's life does not matter. It means that based on the history of how this country was founded, there was always a question as to whether or not a Black life matters. And it's just trying to underscore that we do. We know most other lives matter. Let's just remember we should be in that as well.
Yeah. So it's almost like the exclusion, which is why, but then people say, oh, well, if I support Black Lives Matter, I am not supporting people in law enforcement. And that's just not true.
At all. From my standpoint, I know everybody, and sometimes you have to log off. Another coping mechanism is get off Facebook.
Great point.
Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself crazy. And no, it does not mean that. We're not saying law enforcement lives don't matter. They do. Remember, you have Black officers, you have officers of color. So of course they're counted in that. But again, this goes back to people educating themselves. It's a matter of history. And really having to underscore that we as Black people, we're human. We're not chattel. We're not animals. We're not anything else but human beings, just like you.
Yeah, great point. Kaliah, thank you. I can't even thank you enough for, having this conversation with me, taking the time and helping build this resource for our community, because for our students and even for others outside our students, our colleagues, our friends and family, to be able to listen to these conversations, I think will really make a difference. And so thank you for being willing to share your perspective, especially because every situation or every person is unique and their experiences are unique. And it's important for us to capture those. So thank you.
And thank you for capturing this, because this is an important time in history.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
To capture sentiments, to capture where we are, to just capture all of this. It's a lot of work, but it really is a labor of love. So thank you.
It is. Thank you.